All right, what's up? We're live. We have me, Max, Untitled XYZ, Renee, Colborn's over in the corner there. Welcome everyone to another fantastic, hopefully fantastic, MOCA Weekly Town Hall. We're excited to be here, and let's just jump right in. Untitled, why don't you tell everyone why you hate OpenSea?
Oh, Max. brutal. I don't hate OpenSea.
Yes, you do.
I think OpenSea 2, for those who don't know, all right, let's rewind. OpenSea 2 is coming out of beta. OpenSea 1 is sunsetting in a few days. I think with the sunset of OpenSea 1, there are quite a lot of features that are being taken away. And one of those happens to be how they do URI parsing, which happens to be about how they basically read metadata for certain collections. And that has a negative impact on rooms. So if you look at rooms on OpenSea right now, basically half of them are visible. If you look at rooms on Rarible, all of them are visible and they look fine. So I think this is just a choice. OpenSea is kind of consolidating their rules and what they need to maintain. And I understand that in a way, but I also think I would really hope that they make the right choice and consider the change that we've submitted, which as Renee could describe, I don't think it's a very big lift. It's just like one function, one line of code, and that would go a long way to preserve collections like ours and maintain visibility for those. So I hope they do it. I have no hatred towards anyone.
This answer, I'm a lot more infuriated. I want to talk about this, and I'll be the avatar of anger. So OpenSea. Yeah, I guess let's provide a little context. Also, let's bring our friend
Colborn couldn't even handle it. He just left. He was just.
Daim, do you want your camera on? It doesn't have to be on if you don't want it to.
Trying to get my my earpiece working.
Well, we're happy to have you. I'm just about to give everyone an overview of what's going on with OpenSea. So, my understanding is that OpenSea. Well, I guess why don't we start with me? I noticed that when OpenSea changed to its V2 interface, that a lot of the historical information on markets and market conditions, and also like the provenance of individual NFTs, was no longer like findable at all. It was just not discoverable. It's not a part of like OpenSea interface at all to have like research tools that like I found really like. Oh, look at this! This is a crazy screen view. Like things that are really important to me as like a writer and a critic and like a scholastic interpreter of crypto art, like what was the highest floor price of a collection, what was like who was minting at what time, how many people were buying on what day, things like that. Just general provenance, just no longer there because the OpenSea's interface is now completely about like portfolio management and like investment management. So part of the problem there is that OpenSea is obviously making this very profound push towards just really kind of fully being a investment tracker, and that is bad for us with rooms specifically because they are no longer providing the internal interface required to like view like assets in their original form unless they like conform to OpenSea's strange requirements. So we reached out to OpenSea and we were like, hey, a lot of these rooms are not showing up in the way that they were in V1. So why is that happening? Like, this is really important to us. This is where people go to discover, see, and catalog NFTs. And they were basically like, why don't you migrate it to a completely new contract, destroy the provenance so as to better fit with our system, which is a completely ludicrous ask. And I think demonstrates a lot of the just lost values of OpenSea, in that they've just completely decided to ignore the people who actually use the site. And I think the larger problem is that, like, Sans and OpenSea, Untitled, I'm glad you mentioned Rarible. Like, we've been recommending in the past couple of days that people go to Rarible to see their rooms, because it's actually like a useful interface that shows these pieces in kind of their full glory and catalogs all of them. It doesn't require whatever weird specified contract that OpenSea is demanding that everyone use. Like, we're just going to go further down the rabbit hole of like non-discoverability on in the NFT world, and that seems like a really, really dangerous precedent, because there's not really anywhere that's come in and tried to pick up the slack of OpenSea, just in a way.
I mean, it is like the particular field about which we are talking is called like token URI, where you throw in a token ID, and then the function outputs the IPFS hash, and that IPFS hash, then when you open it, unveils the metadata of that NFT. That's how it works. And in our old rooms contract, which we cannot change anymore because we decided not to do a proxy contract, like old school, like deploy, and I don't know, like it was a different mentality years ago when we made that decision that you cannot modify stuff, you cannot mint more tokens. Like with a proxy contract, you could do that. But we decided against that. And then we deployed it, and it worked all the time. It worked on OpenSea testnet. It worked on the marketplace once we were live, and we were just assuming everything is fine. And then a few weeks ago, when the thing popped up, we saw that instead of returning IPFS://token hash, or the IPFS hash, it only returns the IPFS hash, and that destroys our entire collection. So how can you fix that? You could write like a function that for particular smart contracts, or according to a certain logic, let's just say you write a function that defines if something is an IPFS hash, then you say, oh, yes, in that case, you just prepend IPFS://, and then the value that is returned in our case, because the stuff is missing, which wasn't prepended by the function. Once you do that, everything works. Like it's like vibe coded in a minute. Like it's also written by a human within a minute. Like it's just like one line of code. And I cannot imagine that all the smart contracts deployed from 2017 upwards to now, especially in the early days, stuff that cannot be changed anymore, that all of the stuff has been done in the Wild West days according to whatever standard has been defined along the way. And that all of those collections do not work. Like a lot of those, which are not according to this particular token URI standard, won't work in the new OpenSea version. And in the old one, they had like a middleware function which like fixes this, as I described, for all sorts of projects, pattern, whatever, to make the stuff work. And they seemingly have decided to leave that out and see what happens. And I can already see that once they take V1 offline and only V2 works, that a lot of projects are going to reach out and say, guys, like, what's up? And then they will have a lot of wrath against them in the public, which I think it would be smart to just like tell the people like we are going to take care of, and then take care of it. Because if like some of the significant older collections are not compatible with your marketplace, it just like leaves a bad taste, and people go to a competitor where everything works. That's like what I'm thinking about it.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Oh, sorry, Diane.
it's just such an unprofessional approach to take, especially for the platform that has sort of been the default platform, like for certainly since I got into crypto art back in 2019. OpenSea has sort of always been the default sort of NFT explorer, and everyone's priority was making sure that stuff was working on OpenSea, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the time that happened by somebody figuring out sort of their 6 degree of separation connection to somebody high enough up at OpenSea to be able to make whatever minor change to the OpenSea display code base to actually get stuff working. And like, I'm absolutely certain that there's a shitload of stuff that probably, even by the standards that were already in place when they launched, has no business displaying correctly, but still has been displaying correctly on OpenSea version 1. And because it displayed correctly on OpenSea version 1, all the other places made sure they displayed stuff correctly as well, following OpenSea's lead. And for now, them deciding that they suddenly don't give a shit, and stuff that's on the blockchain should just basically disappear because I don't know, because OpenSea can't follow like sane software development conventions of not degrading their own functionality with an upgrade, and like, I don't know. It makes no sense. Like so many OpenSea moves make no sense.
Well, so great point. And I want to ask Colborne, like as our like resident kind of like market guru, like, can you get inside the heads of OpenSea for a second?
100%. That's really, thank you for asking that question, because this is 100% about a transition to primary sales over secondary sales. There's no facilitation of secondary sales anymore. I think the play moving forward is just like partner with the brand, build some crappy product, and just put it on the front page and try and mint it out, and just run as much primary activity as possible. Because as a collector, as somebody interested in the history, the UI UX feels like a total redesign away from any of the provenance, away from any of the activity. It is like next to impossible to see what something has sold for in the past, so you can kind of compare and contrast. The old interface, frankly, was great, and then it got really existential, because at the peak of the PFP mania, Blur was taking all the traders away. But the people that are going to stick around aren't the traders, aren't the flippers, they're the people that actually care and have poured themselves into the space and have deep knowledge. And now really there feels like there's nowhere to go. So like from an economic standpoint, that's where it feels like the shift is to me.
But that was Nifty Gateway's business model forever, right? Like essentially,
Totally.
like, they were the primary, at least in my experience, like they're the like avatar of like building their entire business model around like exactly what you said, partnering with an individual, partnering with a brand, partnering with like some name, whether it's a big name or not, and building their business model around the primary mint out, the experience of the primary sale. But it kind of floors me that would be so lucrative, that would be more lucrative than taking a percentage off the top of all these secondary sales.
I mean, it's really odd to me that nobody wants to build the art side of the market, right? This is where you're going to get your 7-figure sales, your 8-figure sales in the future. Like, why is it not easier to facilitate, the things that I see on the OpenSea 2 homepage are a little baffling to me. But I would feel like that is where the money is, instead of selling, 10,000 whatever at $20.
Yeah. I think, it's controllable. Like, you can control the primary so much more, and it's maybe more predictable from a business perspective, where if they're looking for kind of like a reliable month-to-month sort of revenue forecast, then they can say, we're going to partner with these brands, do X drops, expecting to sell out X percentage. That gives us a little bit of a prediction of runway and earnings. Whereas like if you're trying to predict, especially in like a very kind of emerging market, the long tail effect of like, you know, an artist taking off and having an earlier collection sell and pick up again. It's harder to understand, but I agree. Like, I think that is going to be massively valuable as this kind of ecosystem matures. You're going to see collections kind of having these ebbs and flows, and if you can't capture that, or if you're unwilling to respect royalties, which, you know, it's just been a race to the bottom, like, and here we are.
But the question is, my question is, like, even if you're going to pivot your business model to be more of a primary sales generator, like, why does that require denigrating your product to begin with? Like, my understanding, like, they could have done a UI UX redesign. In fact, I'm in favor of UI UX redesigns, but why fundamentally change what you're working with? To like, it doesn't seem to me that changing your business model, at least on like a marketing and positioning side, to reflect like a desire to have a more predictable kind of like primary sales motivated market, why that would require changing the internal code, why it would require like leaving this other side of the business model behind. Like, why not just have the secondary market capabilities that you've always had as a secondary thing here? Okay, here's our predictable business model on this primary drop. We also might get some money from here, instead of now just saying, okay, we're just going to be purely a primary market creator, and we're going to limit our ability to make any money from these secondary sales. Like, I don't understand the thinking there. It seems like they're doing work. It seems like they've done a lot of work to cut off further sources of revenue, even if those sources.
Those things are probably only loosely correlated. I feel like, you know, I'm not sure if necessarily the change was the catalyst for them starting to work on OpenSea version 2. Honestly, given I feel like their past tendency to make sort of to do arbitrary per project fixes could very well have, you know, been pushing their OpenSea version 1 code base towards like, you know, unmaintainability for years and years. And, you know, from that perspective, I could well imagine that, you know, might have been a reasonable and even prudent decision to maybe start something from scratch. But I mean, you're still absolutely right, Max, because, you know, the reasonable approach to start something for scratch for you know, an application with this huge pre-existing user base and these sort of historic legacy functionalities and expectations would have been to sort of sit down before writing a single line of code and, you know, spend, you know, weeks, if probably, you know, not months, coming up with like a really clear set of minimum base sort of legacy or continuity requirements that, you know, the new code base has to achieve before you even start worrying about implementing, you know, new functionality. Essentially sort of making your first goal to get to a point where the new code base is like an acceptable swap-in replacement for what the old could do before deciding what additional bells and whistles you want to do. But of course, you know, that assumes that that stuff is a priority for you. If your priority is to, you know, fall over backwards and, you know, demonstrate to the VCs that have you by the balls to that you are, you know, fully committed to you know, shaking things up and you know, focusing in on the easy money, you know, coming your way, then maybe what they did is exactly the right way to do it, by, you know, saying, you know, fuck it all to whatever you had working and you know, start building from scratch, specifically with your, you know, high priority goals in mind, and whatever old functionality, never mix it in there, just make up some bullshit and post it a week in advance on your blog and on Twitter as to why that functionality was barely being used and therefore is going away.
I mean, it's also interesting on a market side because like Super Rare, by contrast, seems to be changing their business model to the opposite end, right? They're focusing much more intently on secondary sales and on like the white glove market of high valuation secondary sales, right? It seems like they've built their whole like future market around like their ability to like get X copies into people's hands and skim a little bit off the top of 6-figure sales. It seems interesting that OpenSea would take the completely opposite tact and say our business model is going to be about facilitating the primary sale of mostly garbage that like I don't know. Untitled, you said before, like, okay, getting into OpenSea's head, like we're gonna have a predictable revenue model. We're gonna have an expectation that this is how much we're gonna sell out of these products. But if there's one thing I've learned from doing this, it's that you can't expect anything. At least in the last couple of years, there's been no ability to predict what's going to be a highly valuable project, what's going to mint out. And it seems like so much of the potential revenue is off of the like
The long
lengthy
tail.
effect. Yeah, exactly. The long tail of like exceedingly high prices, right? It's not the minting of squiggles that was important for art blocks. It's that squiggles became squiggles, Same thing with Fidenzas, ringers, all these like really, really, high market value PFPs, or not PFPs, sorry, generative art projects. But it just, again, I don't know if either of these market models works in a vacuum, but it seems strange that both of these companies would have said, okay, we're done doing both of these things. We're going to pigeonhole ourselves into one specific channel.
Well, the wild card, just to throw it in here, which I'll just say really quickly, the C token. Like, we don't know exactly how that's going to operate, what incentives and behaviors that's going to basically encourage. I imagine it's going to be encouraging. Oh no, we lost Renee. I imagine C is going to encourage those kind of like banner sales that are happening through these drops, like buy this featured sale. But I don't know. We don't know yet. So I think that's going to help answer a lot of these questions in my mind. I'll just throw that out there.
I don't think though it's two things. Like in my mind, we're dealing with three things, and both OpenSea and Super Rare are moving away from the third thing. The third thing being, that sort of long tail where we're actually intentionally and purposefully supporting crypto art in general, including all the hundreds or thousands of crypto artists that make one, I don't know, $300 sale per year. And OpenSea is moving away from that in the direction of we'll take a percentage off of the shitty crypto collectible project of the week every week. And Super is moving in the direction of like, fuck those artists, we don't even want them showing on our website. Let's instead hire people to work the way the traditional art gallery private sellers do, or whatever they're called, and let's see if we can convince the collectors we care about, who have the big money, to pay a shitload for the artists of the season, right? The Sam Sprats, X-Copy is not artist of the season, but basically trying to make the big sales and only the big sales, and maybe occasionally trying to elevate an artist that seems to be on the rise to to that pedestal of being able to get and sustain big sales for at least a season or two. And yeah, it's that long tail, I think, that everybody seems to be ceasing to give a shit about. And I don't know. Part of me wonders if it's coming from a place of maybe the way both OpenSea and Super Rare did it. Maybe there was a lot of sort of tedious low-level support that had to go along with that. But honestly, I'm not sure if that was the case, that's not an indication of them having been doing a bad job of it. Because I'm pretty sure the long tail thing is Manifold's entire thing. And Manifold effectively more or less refuses to do any sort of support unless you have like a personal connection, and it doesn't seem to stop people from using it. Manifold is, from my perspective as a crypto artist, is excellent if you want to do something fairly standard, and is pretty good if you want to do something that is just a little step away from standard, and somebody else out there can clue you in how to do it, but try to do something, or have a question about something that just was never discussed even on the Manifold forums. I have no clue how to get a fucking answer. I have questions I wanted to ask Manifold for years, and I've never gotten an answer. And you know what? I don't love that, but I don't hate them. I have far more goodwill for them than I do for Super Rare or for OpenSea. And I have used them on again, off again when it made sense, and will continue to do so in the future. And I mean,
Daim, let me ask
yeah,
you a question. You were one of the very first artists to mint on Art Blocks. I think you were Art Blocks.
the very first post-launch artist on Art Blocks. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what was their, what's your relationship with them from like a business side? Like, as we're talking about OpenSea and Super Rare and Manifold, like, Art Blocks has kind of fallen under the radar, I think, with a lot of what's going on. I don't think generative art has been really in and of itself a sterling kind of like market. Just curious, like, within this continuum of your experience with these sites and platforms.
Like do you mean at the time, or sort of over the years, or both?
Sure, whatever. I'm just
Yeah.
curious. This is my first time here.
So I mean, initially, I don't know if you recall, but I mean, I sort of got on Art Blocks because I literally was sort of loosely involved with helping Snowfro, the founder, sort of like not debug, like troubleshoot the fledgling Art Blocks code earlier in the year prior to the launch. So I initially got into that stream of curated artists through having that connection. And I think initially it was a pretty, initially it felt very, very crypto art, as in, like, people weren't being turned away. If you had a cool idea, there was an interest to help you make it happen. I think very, very quickly after that didn't change yet quickly thereafter, but I think the steps that eventually, I feel like, led towards that changing started happening very early on, with the folks behind Art Blocks wanting nothing to do with the curation. I'm assuming so as not to get accused of gatekeeping, or of playing favorites or whatever else, which I guess is not unreasonable.
For me,
And
back when we still had shared values.
yeah, yeah. And so I think that's what kind of took things in the direction of the curation board, which I'm not sure how long it took to set up, but I feel like for the first 6 to 12 months, it was it was a fairly free for all type thing. Even after a little bit of some of those like big, breakout successes like Ringers and Fidenzas and whatever else. And I think in the first year, or maybe even into the first 18 months, um, there was also this thing where if you were a curated artist, you you basically had like carte blanche ability to launch a non-curated, I think it was called Playground collection, um, just based off of sort of that pre-existing trust in your ideas or vision as an artist that if you were good enough to be curated, then they don't need to sort of micromanage whether or not your next idea is okay to appear on the platform. um, and then sort of over time the curation board, I think, you know got I imagine they probably also started getting more and more submissions on the regular.
Mm.
And I think there was probably set a certain amount of launches per week, and so you know between the the availability of potential projects continuing to rise and the number of slots for projects to actually launch not necessarily getting bigger, the curation board would obviously just get more and more, I don't know if demanding is the right word, but more what's the right word, Max?
Uh,
Um,
pulled in every direction.
Well, basically, I think they started trying to make sure that they pick out the winners, out of the submissions,
Oh
and
yeah, they had to
that
get choosier.
yeah, and there definitely started to come a time when maybe after the 2 year mark, and definitely more recently. I am personally aware of, like a number of submitted projects that absolutely would have made it in the early days. Projects that in some cases were probably better and higher quality than a lot of the earliest art blocks projects. And again, like for like 6 to 18 months, art blocks was pretty much a free for all.
Mm.
And still got rejected because now now we have these more stringent expectations, and even good projects are regularly going to get turned down because they weren't the best out of the 50 that they looked at that week.
Yeah, naturally.
So you know um I would say I enjoyed the early phase of art blocks more. Um, I I didn't. I don't know. Some early curated artists made sort of um, very heavy use of that ability to sort of mint without having to go through curation again,
Mhm.
in the early first year and a half, 2 years. I only did one project in that time, and I think that was pretty close to when that whole thing would end. And by the time I did it, already the vibes were pretty different, and um, I don't know. It again, early enough, it felt very crypto art, very personal, very sort of much a community thing. Later on, it felt a lot more sort of businessy and corporate, and
Yeah, that's natural.
clearly you were dealing with like whatever dealings you had with art blocks were with people who understood themselves as being very low level, and the moment you asked or suggested something that wasn't absolutely box standard, it would have to travel up the food chain, and you would never speak with the person making the decision, but you would eventually be told, more likely than not, a very polite no, and sort of move on. So I don't know. I like art blocks. I have a lot of reason to be grateful for what it was and what it accomplished. But I see art blocks as having traveled basically the same path that seemingly every crypto art platform is destined to take, which is initially accept everything, and then you get far enough, and stop giving a shit about most of the people that got you where you are, and sort of focus on your blue chips,
Yeah,
because that's where the money comes from.
yeah, naturally. And Colburn
Yeah.
and I talked a lot about this in the podcast, just like the impossibility of running a business in this space because of that same necessity, right? Once the fervor dies down with a huge population, you have to start like, if you can't take a little bit of money from a lot of people, you have to take a lot of money from a few people. Do we have any good news from crypto or anything that like maybe? No, I don't mean that like in like a shithead way. I'm just like anything that maybe escaped my radar, anything that we're excited about.
I mean, I wanted to have more of a philosophical conversation around if we actually think decentralization works.
Well, it's tough to have all these things are, to that point, Colborn, I was just going to say, like, it's tough to have a third party business in an anti-third party technology, like that's kind of the invisible friction for a lot of this, is like a lot of these services should not exist or should not need to.
Yeah.
Or at least it just kind of goes against the grain of the ethos of crypto and blockchain inherently. So I think that's tough. No one's been able to crack that code yet. But yeah, in my mind, like a lot of these, I mean, we have such a tumultuous and cyclical, violently cyclical kind of scene, and it's all emerging. So it's hard to predict and build a business in any of this.
So I think that's what I've been struggling with is, I think very much that moment that we all experienced, that we have so much nostalgia for, isn't coming back, right? I think we have to move past that. I think that was a special time and place, and there was special context cues that made us want to be more cooperative and work together. But what does it feel like is coming? And it feels more and more like everything is moving to a place where people feel lost, confused, job prospects are low, there's threats of automation across the board. And I think increasingly in these periods, people look to like real leaders who are passionate and have conviction to like, what's that word? Assuage those fears.
Assuage maybe, but I've never heard it spoken aloud.
And fascism enters the room.
The French version.
Totally. So what does it mean when all of the the FANG companies have all of the data on everybody and it's being interpolated. I mean, already, I don't know. It feels like there's very little room for new ideas. Any new ideas get squashed. People aren't willing to like really take up the mantle because so many new ideas are being created and so many new products are fracturing attention into so many different places that it's almost impossible for anything new to catch on, which makes me really frustrated with crypto.
Well, just to add on to that, I feel like there's a lot of pressure too for if a project is initiated, it is expected to become a unicorn. Like there's this kind of like, I don't know, like what if we just had a marketplace that like could keep the lights on? It's not about like, dropping a token, getting investment up the wazoo, and then like partnering with Adidas. It's like, just creating something that is meant to last for 10 years. And not something that will, like all these companies that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars grow and try to become Fortune 500 companies within the span of 6 months, and ICO, then IPO, like all this stuff. It's just like a race. And I would hope that a lot of the ideals of crypto and kind of self-sovereignty sort of ideals would rein that in a little bit, to think differently about how long these businesses need to exist in the first place, or how. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I think it's a not to cut you off, but like the idea that people at a higher level of a company are able to bypass the same forces that govern those at kind of the bottom level of an economy, I think is inherently false, right? So, we know that crypto, sports gambling are all parts of a collective trend kind of at lower levels of an economy where people are hoping to like, people see that the only method towards upward mobility to like hit it big, right? To like make a big bet and have it like, because a slow grind to some kind of financial flexibility doesn't exist. In the same way that you were talking about Untitled, like there's this race to ICO, this race to IPO, so that even if it's like a higher essential level of like economic freedom and economic flexibility, there's still this hope that like you're going to make a good bet and that bet is going to pay off, right? Because it's much in the same way that it's much scarier to like join a company, think that you would work there for 20 years, buy a house, slowly build up equity, etc. Like creating a company and thinking, oh, I'll steward this company for 20, 25 years. I'll like slowly increase the reach. I'll slowly increase the revenue. I'll slowly like amass more and more, power and liquidity to myself. Like that's so much less in vogue because of all the unpredictability, Cobra, that you were mentioning, that the desire is like, can I build something, create, skyrocket its value, sell it and get out. And it's the same kind of like essential thought process, I think, in both avenues. Yesterday I had an idea for an app. It's just cards, right? There's an app for like solitaire, there's an app for poker, there's an app for all these card games. Like, why can't we, I promise I'm gonna make a point here, but like, why can't we have just like an app that's just a deck of cards with like an LLM behind it, and you just tell it what card game you want to play and it just deals the cards like that, right? Like, why do we not have just digital cards? Why do we need like individually programmed games? Point being, I don't think that I'm not going to make a company of this, but like, if I were to, I don't want to change the world. I just want to like make a nut and get the fuck out, right? That's the path towards financial freedom. And I have to think that most people who are creating startup ideas, unless they really think they have like a unicorn idea, which I would say is a percentage of people that actually think that their idea could have like a fundamental change in the world in the way that Coburn, as you were saying, like they would have a passion that would buoy them. Most people just want to see if they can rise to another like economic level and then like, take their bag and run away, because what else do you have but like make a bet on a good idea and go from there. So I get it. I think part of what we're seeing now is the trials and travails of the opposite approach, right? Take OpenSea, for example. OpenSea had what, a couple $1 billion valuation? And then probably at that point could have just sold their IP to somebody or other, but decided to hang on and keep, I'm using this term very loosely and ironically, innovating. And look where it's got them, just like disdain and a lower valuation, and they've just become kind of like a punchline into themselves. And I feel like that's happening to a lot of these businesses that, in hindsight, it was probably better for the principals of that business to have just gotten out at the height.
But I mean, in fairness, like
Coleman,
building. You're muted, I think, Colburn.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just real quick, in fairness, there is no way to get out because that money isn't real. It's not like you can just sell it after a VC raise and, disappear forever and kind of pass the buck. Those people are investing in you to take it to, the idea that there is a next level. All of the money is except for the funding, all of the valuations, all of that stuff is generally pretty fake. And in accepting that money, you kind of sign your life away to be beholden to the people that are funding you.
Bard has a good point in here, just really quick about Sovereign. They're kind of...
Oh, hey, Bard.
Hey, Bard. Sovereign is doing a different approach. You're right. Like they're doing indie drops. They're doing very select projects, and they're not, that might be the future in a lot of ways. These kind of like niche categories that are taking on a very thoughtful approach to curation, taking their time with something. They don't have a ginormous team, and they're taking on kind of a kind of smaller approach and focusing on.
That's us.
Yeah.
Like there's a reason that MOCA been around for
that's true.
4 or 5 years, and sure, it's gotten dark at times, but like pretty much doing what we're doing, like exactly like you said, like small team, no VC money, like much lower stakes. And because you have like such lower stakes, you can be more like nimble and agile in how you go about like continuing.
But everybody here, to their credit, has sacrificed to make that possible. It's not without, there's a lot of, and is it fair now that people need to work 2-3 different jobs, be jacks of all trades, try and continue to learn and grow? And, is that fair, or is that just the nature of like a hyper competitive capitalist economy?
Yeah, I saw there was an article I saw the other day, and it was in the middle of it. It was kind of like, I forget exactly what it was, but in the middle of this like very traditional advice, it was like, you should really get a side gig, get 2 side gigs, actually, if you want to do this or that. And I was like, oh God, like it's pushing people to spread themselves thin in a way that I don't think prior generations have ever had to manage before. But yeah, I think for the creative groups, we are at that moment. AI is creating so much uncertainty about what is going to be sustainable, what it's going to be applicable in a couple years. And I think that's an exciting time. It's a terrifying time, but yeah, I don't know. Don't have answers. But
I think it's that expectation for everything to moon, and if it doesn't, it's an abject failure. Like that's an irrational, unrealistic, unhealthy expectation. And maybe as long as that is like suffused through the blood of like 90% of the participants in this space, maybe as long as that's the case, like there's no real moving forward. Maybe once that dies out, we're gonna be in a better space to have sort of those let's just keep the lights on, sustainable type projects actually be sustainable, because when a project enters that phase, you don't have, an army of lunatics, screaming in Discord and X, for the head of the team to be guillotined because what a scam and slow rug and blah 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 blah.
Yeah, we're right in the middle of the toothpaste and beer economy. I think that's my theory.
Yeah, for a lot
Just
of this
watch.
broadcast, it looks like the baby is suckling on Colborn's shoulder. Yeah, that's to be white.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's tough. I think I'm curious what I mean. We have these like vicious cycles that happen, and I don't know. I don't know how it's so difficult not to basically position yourself as a company to basically raise as much as you can, grow as fast as you can while you have the chance to, and that's what all the pressures are kind of poking at you to do. Especially if you raise, especially if you have a token and the expectation is infinite. Like you're on Twitter, the expectation of followers, infinite. Like there's no checkered flag for any of that. It's just sort of like keep going. That is the rule. And yeah, I don't know. I think at some point crypto is going to start to level out further, and then there's going to be these hopefully longer plateaus where people can make a plan. It's just tough to make a plan among so much uncertainty.
I mean, that probably can start to happen once crypto starts being the niche that it is, right? Once it starts to become something approaching a normal part of regular, normal, non-tech, non-crypto people's lives. And I don't have any doubt that that's going to happen, but at the same time I don't have any sense that that's about to happen immediately in the next year or in the next 3 years, or I don't even know on what timeline, because I feel like there's all these fundamental sort of tech barriers to the average person, doing so, and not just tech barriers either, but the tech barriers are certainly like big things, and honestly they'll probably be solved when Apple pulls a fuck you MetaMask and basically builds a crypto wallet into iOS, and
Please.
fucks over all the existing players, but I don't know. That probably isn't happening this year with the September announcements. That probably isn't happening next year. Like could be another 5 years, could be 10. And the amount of sort of social hatred that there is for all things crypto and all things AI, and like I don't know, we're in a weird spot where there's all these sort of forces pushing progress towards not stopping or halting, but I guess pushing progress to stay in its own lane and not flow out to the masses.
It's really sad because I know how to save OpenSea.
Let's hear it.
Here it is. Put it on the table. Let's go.
Should I put it on the table? Okay.
Do you want to sell this idea?
Huh?
Do you want to sell this idea? Because
I mean, I could sell this idea. I think it's probably obviously too late for them to pivot, but the value is not in having the marketplace, right? The marketplace is actually secondary to the thing that people want, which blew and came out of COVID, and what feels so good about what we're doing right now, which is the idea that you can belong to a community, right? The problem is now I'm in 100 communities, but I have no idea what the fuck is going on in any of them, right? So all they had to do was like look through your wallet, see what you have, and then every day send you a digest on what is happening in that community, right? If they attached it to, you know, allowing whatever Optimism to or whoever to send airdrops to CryptoPunks, and you could go to OpenSea and you could just claim that there, right? And if you knew what was happening in your communities and you had some sort of financial incentive to keep coming back to OpenSea because they were providing you with free information about what is happening in your community, then you would be much more likely to, one, hold, so the price would go up, you're getting good information, or buy into new communities. But the fact of the matter is like, can I justify holding a CryptoPunk? I have no idea what the fuck is going on. It constantly keeps moving. And then there would be kind of a central repository for information, community access, and it really doesn't seem that hard. And from that, I think the sales would be like secondary. And that is so antithetical to Blur and would engender so much goodwill that I think people would stick around. If you as an artist,
I would love that.
If you as an artist could use OpenSea as like a mail serve to everybody that's your collector and hit them with the information, because everybody's spinning up individual Discord things. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to read through 100 fucking Discord servers, right? So they need to be like the central repository for people to give updates to their community and facilitate all the marketing. You know, when is Untitled's new drop? Like,
yeah, I like that a lot.
Anyway,
I mean, as a creator, I'd like that a lot, because you could also, I would be willing to pay for features like putting up, you know, announcements, banners, you know, different things that tie in socials, to your point, partnerships with other communities. Like that's a really good point, because it is so flat. It is so stale to look at just all these scrollings of 2D PFPs again and again and again and again, and that's it. There's nothing else. There's no glue. There's all this other circumstantial stuff that's totally outside of OpenSea. But then ultimately, I like that a lot. I think there should be something like that. Let's build it.
yeah, I mean, it should be built. It's a little late in the game.
Yeah,
but it's who said that? Oh, Daim. All right, see you, buddy.
Take care, Daim.
Yeah, it's, you know, then everybody would use it, and then everybody would engage with it, and then I would actually open an OpenSea email.
OpenSea?
I would open emails to OpenSea.
OpenSea email.
Yeah, I mean, I had, you know, a big whiteboard brainstorming session on this a couple months ago, because I don't know, I had the idea inside.
You think this is a better idea than my cards app?
honestly, I don't, because I also just a simple backgammon app in the same way that they have chess.com. I think both are equally valid.
Vibe code it.
You lure people in with cards and backgammon, and then we actually are sending newsletter emails.
And on the flip side, the NFTs on the art of the cards, you know, come on.
My NFTs are currently worthless. They're currently worthless. You know, they're only as good as like the information and community that's distilled from them, right? And the only community that actually seems to be paying attention to each other is like anybody that holds X copy. But frankly, I have no idea what people are doing, what is going on. It's so fragmented across like everywhere, and it really shouldn't be that hard, especially from a position of leverage that OpenSea has, to begin to build that out. And then you just like prioritize it. Whoever has the highest floor price is what goes first in the email.
Yeah, well, it's a membership economy. And that would formalize it. That would structure it. Totally. Like that's totally makes sense, because otherwise all this community bullshit, like people just use that word so loosely, but it's not community at all. It's fractured across all of these totally disparate, like, you know, quiet, cornered off apps that are impossible to aggregate.
To his credit, like that's basically what Roger Dickerman does, and that's how he's like made his nut, right? He's like putting out information, and like I've given him shit, and like I think that a lot of people would give that whole kind of ecosystem shit, but like he prioritizes the information that concerns the people who have the highest kind of like influence and have the highest stakes in the game by owning the highest price artwork. So when you see 24 hours of art every day, of course, it's always going to start with Xcopy. It always does. It always is the same list of 12 people. But those people have demonstrated maybe not their commitment to crypto art, but their commitment to those artists and to the necessity of their interest in what's going on here because they made a big bet, you know, a 5 or 6 figure purchase. So they need to know what the market is, you know, and maybe it's not egalitarian, but did I do that?
That's my Bassiato dance.
No, like it's effective and it's intelligently targeted.
I feel like Renee is building all this right now. That's why he's quiet.
No, please not.
Should we get out of here? It's been about an hour.
Yeah, sure.
Do it.
Great. This was fun. I love these conversations where we don't actually talk about anything MOCA's doing. You guys know what we're doing.
We're just like, you know, we're like vultures picking through the bones.
Almost got it.
Oh God,
There's so
that's
much
awful.
meat there.
There's so much delicious meat there, you know, but other people don't see it.
The Museum of Crypto Art, there's so much delicious meat.
Yeah, no, rotten meat. It should be rotten meat.
No,
That's
David
what vultures.
has a trademark on rotten meat. We have to.
No, he has a trademark on freshly ground beef.
So you think there's an economy outside of?
We're a step down the ladder. I think there's a vulture economy.
Well, gentlemen, it's been fun as always. Thank you all for being here, and thank you everyone for listening. Specifically, thank you Bard Janssen and Bassiato for showing up in the chat to just say what's up. And we'll be back same time next week doing the same thing. Who knows what bones we'll pick off next week? Probably the same ones.
Bring us your rotten meat.
Bring us fresh. Thank you guys all for being here. I'll talk to y'all soon.